The house was too big for one person, but I bought it anyway. It was tucked between two hills at the edge of a town where no one locked their doors. The price was low enough to make me suspicious, but the inspection came back clean, and I figured the sellers were just trying to offload it fast before winter. I moved in on a Wednesday in September. The trees were already starting to turn. The place had a strange layout. 3 bedrooms upstairs, 2 bathrooms, and a living room shaped like a rectangle someone had twisted slightly before the concrete dried. The basement wasn't finished, just concrete and plywood stacked in one corner, next to a pile of rusted tools I assumed were left behind. There was a hatch in the floor against the far wall, nailed shut. I didn't think much of it. I worked remotely, and the first 2 weeks were quiet. The house stayed cold, even when the sun came in at full tilt through the east-facing windows. The heating kicked on, but the temperature barely rose. I checked the insulation. Everything looked normal. There was a draft I couldn't place, but I figured that came with age. The place was built in the 1980s and hadn't been renovated much since. On the 3rd weekend, I decided to clean out the basement. I wanted to build some shelves and maybe install better lighting. The hatch caught my attention again. It had 4 rusted nails holding it shut and a faint ring stain across the wood, like someone had once spilled oil on it. I pried it open with a crowbar. Dust rose up in a sheet and settled on my boots. The space underneath was shallow, maybe 2 feet high, and ran beneath the floor like a shallow trench, a crawl space. Nothing unusual for houses in this area, especially older ones. The smell wasn't great, but I expected that. Damp dirt, old wood. I aimed my flashlight inside and saw trash. At first I thought it was construction, debris, insulation, maybe some broken brick. It wasn't. The first thing I pulled out was a fast food bag from a chain I didn't recognize. Inside were 4 empty wrappers and a cup with a cracked plastic lid. The logo had faded, but the grease hadn't. There were more bags behind it, dozens. Some crushed, some folded neatly like someone had planned to reuse them. There were soda cans lined up against the wall like they'd been displayed on a shelf. One of them had a plastic straw still poking out the top. The trash stretched at least 12 feet back into the space, disappearing into the dark. There were blankets too, bundled and tied off with string. Old ones, faded. One was a child's sleeping bag with cartoon astronauts on it. I backed out and closed the hatch. Upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table for a while, without moving. I didn't like jumping to conclusions, but there was too much for it to have just drifted in from somewhere. Someone had lived down there, recently enough that the wrappers hadn't disintegrated. I emailed the previous owner. I kept it vague. I asked if they'd ever used the crawl space, if they knew whether someone had stored things there before. The reply came 2 hours later, short and direct. No idea. Never opened it. That was it. No greeting, no sign-off. I didn't reply. That night, I barely slept. Every time the house creaked, I froze. I told myself I was being stupid. No one was living under the house. I would have noticed. I would have heard. Still, I kept the light on. In the morning, I called a pest control service just to have someone else go down there. When the guy showed up, he looked about 19. He wore gloves, but didn't have a mask. He crawled into the space with a flashlight, pushing the trash aside with a metal rod. When he came back up, his face was unreadable. He said, "There's no infestation, but someone's been using it. I'd say within the last month, maybe less." I asked him how he knew. He didn't answer directly, just said the cans weren't rusted, the fabric wasn't moldy, and there were recent food items mixed with older ones. I paid him, and didn't ask for more. I spent the rest of the day online, reading up on squatting cases. Apparently it wasn't rare. People living in attics, garages, even inside the walls of homes that didn't have security systems. Some stayed for years without being noticed. Some only came in at night. That idea got stuck in my head. I started locking every door, even internal ones. I ordered a set of small motion sensors and placed one by the basement hatch. I told myself it was paranoia, but I installed them anyway. 2 nights later, the one near the hatch went off. It was 3:12 a.m. The alert came to my phone with a soft ping. The message was clear. Movement detected. Basement hatch. I stayed frozen under the blankets for almost an hour before I worked up the nerve to check the basement camera feed. Nothing. No figure, no sound, no door swinging open. Just the camera. Still and dark. I went downstairs the next morning. The hatch was closed, same as I'd left it. No marks on the floor. I checked the app. The sensor wasn't faulty. It only triggered once. I nailed the hatch shut again and pushed a shelving unit over it. The next day, I came home from getting groceries and found the unit shifted 6 inches from the wall. I hadn't touched it. The nails were intact, but 2 looked shinier than the others, like they'd been pulled out and put back in. I didn't call the police. I should have. Instead, I went to a hardware store and bought a padlock and a motion-triggered camera with night vision. I installed the lock through the hatch, drilling straight into the joists. Then I screwed the camera into the ceiling beam above it and synced it to my laptop. That night, I stayed downstairs on the couch, the laptop screen open beside me. Nothing happened. The next night, the camera went dead at 2:47 a.m. When I woke up and checked the footage, the last frame showed the basement empty. The timestamp froze. After that, just black. The camera had power. The memory card was gone. I found the slot open, the card missing. I hadn't touched it. I called an electrician and asked him to install extra lighting across the basement. I didn't mention why. When he was done, I drilled through the hatch and poured in a bag of powdered lime. It didn't accomplish anything, I knew that. But I needed to do something. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name and house number written in block letters. Inside was the missing memory card. I didn't plug it in. Instead, I packed a suitcase and left the house that night. I rented a place in town and scheduled a contractor to seal the crawl space permanently. I never stepped back inside until the work was done. When I returned, the hatch was gone, replaced with a poured slab of fresh concrete. I walked over it once just to check. It didn't shift. I kept the card in a drawer for a while, then burned it in the sink. The next winter, I put the house back on the market. I priced it higher than I'd paid. It sold in 3 weeks. I didn't leave a forwarding address. We moved in on a Monday. It had rained the entire drive-in, and the dirt road leading to the house had turned to a washboard of ruts and gravel. It wasn't the house I would have chosen, but it was the only one available that checked all the boxes we needed. Cheap, available immediately, and big enough for the 3 of us. There was no ceremony to our arrival. Boxes inside, doors locked, leftover pizza eaten on the kitchen counter. By the second day, we'd unpacked the essentials and pushed the rest to the garage. I spent most of the evening setting up the internet while Clara organized the kitchen. Miles ran in loops around the house until he wore himself out and passed out on a pile of folded towels. The next morning we found the basket. It was on the front porch, just behind the screen door. No note, no tag, no logo. The cellophane was neatly taped at the top, and a bow wrapped the handle in 2 tight loops. Inside were 6 or 7 different items: a small bottle of wine, a wedge of hard cheese, a roll of summer sausage, crackers, a jar of green olives, and a tiny tin of cookies. Clara assumed it was from the real estate agent. I thought it was from one of the neighbors. We'd passed 2 houses on the road in, one with a collapsed trampoline in the yard and the other with a rusted-out truck on cinder blocks. I didn't know which of them would have gone through the trouble of curating a gift basket, but I didn't say anything. Clara liked the idea. We left the basket on the table and picked at it during the day. She opened the sausage first, slicing it into quarters. The cheese was sharp, the crackers stale. The wine tasted cheap, but drinkable. I took one of the cookies and found the inside filled with orange paste. It had a chemical aftertaste, like it was designed for a shelf life measured in decades. Later that evening, Clara said her stomach hurt. She blamed the wine. By midnight, she couldn't sleep. She sat on the bathroom floor holding her sides. Her skin turned pale in patches, and her upper lip looked slightly blue. She said it felt like heat cramping, but without the heat. I told her it was probably food poisoning and started Googling symptoms. The closest match I could find was botulism, but I didn't say the word out loud. At 3 a.m, she was still on the floor, breathing shallow, her eyes unfocused. I called the hospital and told them we were coming in. I carried her to the car while Miles slept through it all. The drive took 40 minutes. At the ER, I stayed with her while they checked her vitals, took blood, and asked if she'd consumed anything unusual. I told them about the basket. The nurse wrote it down. They kept her overnight. I went back to the house and boxed up everything that had come from the porch. I wore latex gloves from a first aid kit I found in the linen closet and dropped each item into a trash bag, even the ribbon. I didn't want any of it in the house. I put the bag in the trunk of my car and left it there. The next day, Clara was stable, tired but coherent. The doctor said it looked like a mild toxin reaction, possibly chemical or bacterial. He said they were contacting the state lab to test the food samples. I asked if that meant they were taking it seriously. He nodded. Back home, I called the realtor. Her assistant picked up. I asked if the basket had been sent from their office. She paused for a moment, said she didn't know, then came back and told me no. Nothing like that had been arranged. They didn't do welcome gifts. I hung up and looked through the house paperwork again. There was a sheet labeled Neighborhood Contacts. Only 2 names on it. One was a guy who lived a mile up the road. The other an older woman named Alice, who had left a phone number, but no address. I called both. The first man didn't answer. The number went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Alice picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was dry and formal. I introduced myself and asked if she might have left a basket at our door. She said she hadn't. When I described the contents, she went quiet. After a pause, she said something odd. They must have found another one. I asked what she meant. She apologized and said she had to go. The call ended without a goodbye. I searched her name online, didn't turn up much. A few property listings, an old community calendar. I tried searching the house address instead. That gave me more. 4 years earlier, a man had lived here with his teenage daughter. His name was different from the ones on our seller's contract. I found a court record linking him to a charge of neglect. The details were sparse, but one section mentioned the daughter being hospitalized after ingesting an unidentified substance. No charges had been filed. The case had been dropped. I went to the sheriff's office the next day and asked if I could talk to someone about the house's history. They sent me to a deputy who listened politely, took notes, and asked if I still had the food items. I said yes, they were in the trunk. He came out with gloves and a sealed bag and took the contents from me. He didn't give me much, just said they'd pass it along. Clara came home 2 days later. She was still weak, but the worst had passed. We didn't talk about the basket. It sat on the porch table for a few more days, empty, before I finally threw it into the burn barrel behind the garage. A week after that, I got a call from the deputy. He said the lab found traces of a cleaning compound in the sausage and elevated levels of synthetic preservatives in the cookies, far above what was legally permitted. It wasn't enough to kill someone, but it was enough to cause damage. I asked if that meant it had been deliberate. He said there was no evidence of tampering, no fingerprints other than mine and Clara's. The basket had probably been assembled manually, which made tracing it harder. I asked about the case with the previous tenant's daughter. He said he wasn't at liberty to discuss that. The call ended. For a while, I thought it might be over, but 2 weeks later, I found a second item on the porch. It was a tin can with the label scratched off. The lid had been partially opened with a manual key and then pressed back into place. Inside was a thick layer of pale gelatin, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with nothing written on it. I put the can into a plastic container and left it in the garage. The envelope sat on the kitchen table for 3 hours before I opened it. There was no letter, just a single newspaper clipping. It was from 2006, printed from a scanner. A family of 4 had been found unconscious in their home in a nearby county. The article was short, speculative. No cause had been confirmed, but there were reports of contaminated food found in the trash. The story never made national news. The back of the clipping had a handwritten note in red ink. "Did you eat it all?" I didn't show it to Clara. I stored it in a locked drawer in the hallway desk. I made copies and mailed one to the deputy. No one followed up. We stayed in the house for another 5 months before Clara found work in a different state. We sold quickly. I didn't leave a number with the new owners. The porch table is still there. Sometimes I wonder what'll be waiting on it next. The duplex was built in the late 70s and hadn't been renovated since. The walls were thin, the bathroom tiles loose underfoot, and the kitchen sink leaned just enough to make bowls drift slowly toward the drain. But it was cheap, and I was only planning to stay a year. The unit next to mine was empty when I moved in. The landlord said the previous tenant left a month ago. She hadn't decided whether she was going to sell or rent it again. I didn't ask why they left. The place wasn't bad, just old. A few things creaked, and the hot water was unpredictable. I kept my food in a small fridge I brought from my last apartment. The kitchen had space for a second counter, but nothing was installed, just a patch of linoleum that curled at the corners. I kept cereal boxes stacked on the floor. By the second week, I noticed the milk was going faster than usual. At first, I figured I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't used to living alone. Sometimes I'd pour a full bowl of cereal, watch half of it get soggy, and dump the rest. I wasn't tracking it. Then it started with other things: rice, crackers, a package of string cheese I bought on a whim. I wasn't eating more than usual, but Things were running out before I remembered finishing them. One night I made pasta, left half in the fridge, and by morning, the container was on a different shelf. Not open, just moved. I went online and searched for signs of sleepwalking. I read about people getting up and making full meals, then going back to bed without remembering. But I didn't feel tired during the day. I didn't find dishes in the sink. The stove wasn't warm. One day after work, I came home and found the fridge door slightly open. Not wide, just enough for the light to stay on. Nothing had spoiled. A bag of grapes had been rolled down and clipped. I hadn't clipped it. I called the landlord and asked if anyone else had keys. She said no. The previous tenant had returned theirs, and the maintenance guy hadn't been in my unit since before I moved in. I asked if she was planning to list the other side soon. She said, maybe. Still undecided. That night, I placed a stick of tape across the fridge seal. When I opened it the next morning, the tape was gone. Not peeled, removed completely. I bought a small camera and stuck it to the inside of one of the cabinets, angled toward the kitchen. It didn't have night vision, but I figured it might catch something during the day. I worked long hours. Whoever it was, if it was anyone, would have time. 3 days passed. Nothing. On the 4th, I checked the SD card. The clip was short. The time code read 2:36 p.m. The footage showed the kitchen empty, still, and then the cabinet door blocking the camera slowly swung shut. I replayed it twice. It was the only clip on the card. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have anything to show them. No forced entry, no stolen items, just missing food and a door that had closed itself. I moved the camera to the hallway and pointed it toward the kitchen from the opposite angle. This time I set it to record motion over a wider field. I left it there for 4 days. When I finally checked, there was a single clip saved to the card. It was darker than the last one. The camera had picked up movement near the fridge, just a sliver of someone's arm reaching toward the door handle. Not clearly, just the elbow, part of a shirt sleeve. Nothing identifiable. The fridge door opened, then shut again. The arm disappeared. The whole clip lasted 13 seconds. I played it again, paused, zoomed. The sleeve looked blue. The fabric was wrinkled like someone had been wearing it too long. The next morning, I emptied the fridge, unplugged it, and wedged a chair against the door. I opened every cabinet, every closet. I checked the water heater, the attic hatch, the crawl space behind the bathroom sink. Nothing. I drilled a new deadbolt into the front door and installed a second lock on the back. I didn't tell the landlord. 3 nights later, I heard the sound of a door hinge clicking open. Not a knock, not a creak. Just the clean, oiled pivot of something swinging wide. I was in bed. I stayed still. It wasn't loud, but it came from the kitchen. I waited. The next morning, the chair had been moved. The fridge door was open. The grapes were gone. I didn't leave for work. I pulled everything out of the cabinet under the sink and lay on the tile, shining my phone flashlight across the baseboard. There was a panel behind the pipes, painted the same color as the cabinet. It looked like the rest of the wall, but the paint had chipped around the edges. I ran my fingernail along the seam. It wasn't glued, just slotted in place. It came out easily. Behind it was a square opening cut into the drywall about 2 feet wide. Beyond it, a narrow space, dark and empty. I reached in with the light. The wall had been hollowed out between the units. I followed the space by crawling on my elbows, past the edge of my kitchen, into the wall itself. The drywall on both sides had been cut away. Only the studs remained, lined with strips of duct tape and old cloth stapled to the wood to reduce sound. It was just wide enough to move through without turning sideways. 5 feet in, I found the other opening, a panel just like mine leading into the other unit. It had a handle on this side. I didn't open it. I backed out, closed the panel, and screwed a metal bracket over it. I bolted it into the cabinet frame and covered the screw heads with putty. Then I packed a bag and left. I sent the landlord an email and said I was breaking the lease. I told her there was a maintenance issue and that I wouldn't be returning. I didn't mention the wall. She never followed up. I never saw the person on the other side. I don't know if they knew I found the passage. I don't know how long they were there. Weeks, maybe longer. No lights, no sound. Just the occasional missing item. The quiet shift of something that should have stayed put. The food wasn't the point. They wanted the door to stay open.